Y'all dismissed. Y'all can go home. No. It's always tough to put together a message because you don't know where. You have to believe that what the Lord gives you is on time, but you never know what's going to happen before in worship and what kind of words are going to come forth. But I just believe that God's on time. Amen. And so if a lot of you may not, maybe the first time you've heard me speak, I'm Pastor Jarret. I've been attending the Tabernacle for over 35 years probably. And so this is my home, and it's just an honor to be able to speak to you guys today. It's been a while, so hopefully I can get into the groove pretty quickly. But what Jenny was saying was she knows that God has a plan, and she knows that she's going to get better. But, she said it's hard. She said, that's the truth, right? That it's hard. And, on April 29th, like Jane said, when that, pastor or that woman spoke over her and gave her that testimony, and I'm sure Jenny did not think that testimony was going to include the season that she has to go through now, right? And she didn't expect that. And that's the awesome thing. And I was thinking about this during worship. It's the awesome thing about being able to come together on a Sunday morning in church. And we all come from different areas. We all come from different seasons in our life, but we all come here to see God, to worship God, to experience God, to receive something. But coming to church for the 35 years, obviously I've been through a lot of different seasons coming to church every single Sunday, right? It just makes sense that not every season is as good as the last or is as bad as the last, right? And we all come through different, we all come and we all have different aspects of life that we have to go through. Some of you here may be lost this morning. Some of you may be in a season where everything is going great and everything is perfect. Finances are good, marriage is good, family is good. And you're coming and you come to worship God and just thank God for the season that you're coming in. And some of you may be here and you may not know who God is, or you're waiting for God to intervene in a situation, and maybe this is the worst season of your life. Maybe you've never been in a season like this before, and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but yet you come because you know that God's in control, or maybe you don't know that God's in control, and maybe you're looking for answers. But that's what I love about Christ, because as I walk through every season of my life, he remains the same. He remains constant, right? Regardless of what season that I may be going through, whether it be hard, whether it may be good, or whether I am distant from him or whether I am close to him, he is the same. And it just makes me think, how Jesus meets us where we are. He meets us in the season. It is not a requirement for us to be in a certain place to meet Jesus. Like, we don't have to be in the right state of mind. Thank God, we don't have to be in the right state of mind. We don't have to have our acts together. We don't have to be dressed in our Sunday attire to meet God, because God will meet us anywhere. And you look through the Bible and God met Zacchaeus in a tree on the side of the road. He met Peter in a fishing boat. I think Matthew was collecting taxes, right? And they were all in different seasons of their life. They weren't expecting to meet the Messiah. In the back of their head, they knew, right? In the back of their head, they knew that the Messiah was coming and that Jesus was coming. But the day they met him, right, was Zacchaeus, climbing a tree to get a look, but majority of them, they didn't know that today was the day that they were going to meet the Messiah, that they were going to meet Jesus. most of them were not looking for him. And I think a lot of times today we expect people to walk in the door of church because they're looking for Christ, right? They're just looking for something, and we expect them to walk right through the door. And I believe that most of the time, if you were to go around and ask, and I know, and I'm not going to throw anybody, but I know there's some awesome testimonies of people in here that Jesus met them in their lowest place, the furthest you could possibly be from a church atmosphere. The furthest you could be from a church atmosphere. In the worst seasons of their life that God met them. And so my message today is really going to talk about some of that stuff that we have to go through as people. And I would love to say, if you weren't saved here, that, hey, if you accept Jesus in your life, everything is going to be peachy and keen the rest of your life. I'd love to say that. But I'd be a liar, and I don't want to say that. Because guess what? Even when we do accept Jesus, life is hard. There's going to be situations that are going to be full of pain. There's going to be situations where you're not sure what's going to happen or where you're going to go. You know, and Jenny's the perfect example of that. She leaves a women's conference, and then a month later, right? It would be so easy to say, well, wait a minute. 30 days ago, I got prophesied over. 30 days ago, I got prophesied over. Why do I have to learn how to walk again? Right? It'd be so easy to say that doesn't make sense. But in reality, when you think about it, we all have a path that we have to walk, and sometimes we get blindsided. And it is not always the enemy that blindsides us. Sometimes life can just blindside you out of nowhere. And I believe that every single one of us here, every single person that's put on this planet, I believe that God has a plan and a purpose. It's a perfect will for them. And that we have to walk that out. And sometimes that includes some pain and some hardships. And just life gets in the way. And, you think about it in the Bible, all the stuff that Peter had to go through and Paul had to go through and Jesus had to go through. You just look and you sit there and say, well, man, why can't it just be a little bit easier? And I'm here to say that it's not necessarily easy. I know this is not like, woohoo, yeah, but the reality is it's not easy. But the reality is that God is faithful and that God is constant. And that if we can allow him to get us through these pains, these hardships, these issues, if we can allow him to do a work in us, then there is something on the other side of the pain. There is something on the other side of the hardship that we can get, right? And I just want you to think about it. It's hard sometimes to get your peace, right? It's hard to get your peace. It's hard to get your joy. Can you agree with me? Is it hard sometimes to get peace? Is it hard to understand what's going on? Is it hard? Now, if you can agree with me on that, you can agree with me it's also hard not to have peace. And it's also hard not to have joy, right? It's hard to have your marriage in trouble and on rocky ground, right? It's hard. But it's also hard to get your marriage back on track. It's also hard to get your marriage back on track. So we go through these situations. It's hard to be a single parent. But there's so many things we could sit here and say, God, this is so hard, so hard. It's so hard. And we stay in that place because we look at how hard it is to be there instead of just kind of embracing it and saying, you know what, it's hard to be here and it's hard to get out. So if I have to go through hardships and I have to go through pain, then why can't I just go through the pain and the hardship and come out on the other side of it instead of living in it forever? And you see, this is what a lot of us as Christians and a lot of people do. We go through a season in our life and we go through a storm, right? We go through a storm and we say, oh, it's so hard. God's going to get me through it. God's going to get me through it. But we live in the storm. We live in the storm and we stay in the storm. And then storms usually end at some point. Things happen. Maybe something lifts our spirits a little bit. The pain kind of goes away, but it's still in the back of our head, right? And then we think we get through it. We think we get through the storm. And then a year, 2, 6 months, whatever it may be, that same storm that we were living in 3 months ago hits again. And in reality, it was just that calm of the eye of the storm because we didn't decide to say, God, what do I have to do to get out of this? See, we settle to stay in until the pain subsides, and then we kind of try to move on. And then we go through this circle again. A lot of Christian talk is like you go around the mountain over and over and over again, right? You have to cross the same mountain over and over and over again. Because in reality is, what you did is you went up the mountain and you're going through the pain and the hardship, and God wants to get you over the mountain, but we get so tired of climbing the mountain, we slide all the way back down, and it's easy again. Isn't it easy at the base of the mountain? It's like, oh, this is not bad. And then when you really get to the hard part, where it's about to go over, we slide all the way back down. We're like, oh, it's easy again. I must be through it. But that same mountain stares at us. It's hard to get over that mountain. And so what we're going to do, the title of my message is Rewards or Regrets. Rewards or regrets. And I want to read a scripture for you out of Psalms 13. It's actually the whole chapter. And this is David. And David wrote most of Psalms. He actually wrote a lot of the songs of worship that we sing. He wrote a lot of the prayers that we pray. But I want you to listen to the desperation. I don't want you to just read the scripture, but I want you to listen to the desperation of this psalm. It says, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? So again, I want you to pay attention. Like Chris, I know Chris is awesome with the punctuation and the pronouns. Every question is a statement for the Lord. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, my Lord, my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in depth. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. Now, that's pretty rough. The man who defeated Goliath, the man who became king of Israel, the man who sung worship songs and danced before the Lord and his clothes flew off, right? When the ark came back. And the desperation that he has. And so I don't know about you, but I take a little comfort in this a little bit. Because if David, the man, after God's own heart, the man that brought back the Ark of the Covenant, the man that was chosen king of Israel, if he can say, God, what are you doing in this time? What are you doing right here? Like, I feel like really he's trying to be polite, but he's saying, God, have you lost your mind here? What's going on, right? But then we go to the next verse. And after all the pain and after all the heartache, he laments to God, just like a son would lament to his father, right? Not like a servant to a king, but to a frustrated son to a father. He laments. And then he says, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. And the reason that David can say this, and the reason that he can say it so convincingly, is because he has gone through storms before and has seen the rewards of coming out of the other side. You see, if David would have stayed in his storms, right? So many people stay in their storm their entire life, and at the end of their life, they have nothing but regrets. Oh, I could have done better. I could have done this. I could have done more. I could have patched that up with my family. I could have patched that up with my kids. I could have made that better business decision. I could have done this. I could have done that, but it was too hard, and I'd rather just stay where I was at because it was safer. But if you can allow God to get you through certain situations, there's going to be a reward at the end of it. And one of the rewards is being able to trust, to know that anything that comes your way, that the love of God and your heart rejoices because of his unfailing love and because of the salvation and the redemption that's going to come at the end, right? But you have to be able to get through. And I think about that sometimes in James, it's not on the screen. James 1, verse 2, James says, I rejoice in every suffering that comes my way because it leads to perseverance and it leads to wisdom. And if you're just reading that, you're like, James, what are you talking? Why do you rejoice in suffering? Why do you rejoice in hardships? Why do you rejoice? Because James understood that at the end, that his perseverance is going to come up and that the storm that he's weathering now, if he can get through it, then when the next one comes, he can be victorious over that one. See, we don't rejoice because the storm's over. We rejoice because when the storm is over and God has brought us through it, now we have the strength to get through the next one. Not that there's not going to be another one, and I want you to listen to me because there will be another storm. But if you allow God to get you through the first, then he'll give you the strength to get to the second and through the third and through the fourth and through the fifth and through the seventh until your race is done and you get to rejoice with him in heaven victorious. And not only that, but because of your victory, because of your strength, you get to be a witness like Jenny. To say that I got through this storm and look at what my God did. I didn't want to go through the storm, but I didn't have a choice. You see, Jenny has a choice. She has a choice whether she's going to walk again or not. Right? She has a choice. She didn't have a choice on whether or not she was going to get in that car accident. That was out of her control. But what she does now is completely in her control. She gets to decide whether she gets to walk into this building or get rolled into this building, whether she gets to dance again or whether she doesn't get to dance again. There's an element of choice. And how far that God is going to take Jenny's strength that she has inside of her and let it be a testimony for him. And so we're going to talk it's going to be a quick message. We're going to talk about three people today. The first thing we're going to talk about is Gideon. And so I'm going to read really quickly Judges, just give you a little bit of backstory. Judges 6. Judges 6, chapter 1. It says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like a swarm of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land and ravaged it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So, I don't need to paint that picture anymore, right? Israel left. They were worshiping Baal. They left all the laws of of God, and the Midianites were coming and just destroying everything. You can go to the next. So chapter 7 says, finally they cried out to the Lord because of what Midian had done. He sent a prophet to them and said, the Lord, the God of Israel, he says, I brought you out of Egypt, that is the land where you were slaves. I saved you from the power of Egypt. I saved you from all those who were beating you down. I drove the people of Canaan out to make room for you. I gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You are now living in the land of the Amorites. Do not worship God, but you did not listen to me. So God is reminding them, hey, you're in trouble. Let me remind you what I did for you. Let me remind you how good I am. Let me remind you of the victories that you've had in the past, because now Gideon is just kind of accepted this. They've accepted it for so long that this is normal, that the Midianites come in and beat them up. They are in a storm, and they have just accepted it so much that the next verse you see that just Gideon's so used to being afraid that he just hides when he does his job, right? But God says, hey, I did all this for you before, and you looked away from me. You quit following after me. You didn't listen to me. And so now the Israelites find themselves in a storm. And then we go to verse 11. It says, then the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, the guy where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine press to keep it from the Midianites. So he's hiding in a wine press so that the Midianites don't see what he's doing. And when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us unto the hand of Midian. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Now, if you've heard this scripture preached before, more than likely you've heard the part where he tells Gideon, what are you doing, mighty warrior? And that's what's usually preached, right? Oh, you're a mighty man of God. You know, Rick Pino did a really good song, Mighty Warrior, right? That's what's usually preached. But what I want to emphasize on is verse 14, because Midian, he says, hey, what are you doing, mighty warrior? Midian blows past that. That's completely you got the wrong guy right away. That's not me. He goes straight to say, God, do you remember who you are and that you abandoned us? Sounds like a little bit like David, right? David, don't you remember you kind of, got us out of Egypt, and now all of a sudden here I am, and I'm in this wine press. Did you forget all of that stuff? And now you're coming over to me and calling me a mighty warrior? I think you've lost it a little bit. And I love this back and forth that happens with Gideon and God. But God tells Gideon, he says, go in the strength you have. And I had to read it it says, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hands. And so here's this guy, little bitty guy, smallest guy in his clan, smallest guy in his family. He's hiding because he's afraid of the Midianites. And he says, go in your strength and do what I'm going to ask you to do. And so we don't have to read the whole thing. Basically, Gideon says, okay. He makes an altar to the Lord. Then he goes and he tears down an altar from Baal. And so he starts to just become a little bit active, right? He gets out of the wine press. He climbs himself out and says, okay, God's got a job for me to do. He says, I'm going to build an altar. He builds an altar, kind of like an altar right where he's at. It's outside of town. Nobody really sees it. And then God says, hey, I want you to go build an altar in town, and I want you to tear down the altar of Baal. He's like, whoa, okay. So he's like, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it at night so nobody can see me do it. So he goes down and he tears down the Asherah pole and he builds an altar in the middle of town. He's like, okay, I did that in my own strength, God. I tore down that altar. I got my hammer, my sawzall, my skill saw, got it out, I tore it out, got you the new one. Nobody knows I did it. And then all the people wake up, they say, who did it? Oh, well, I saw Gideon do it. So then they were like, let's kill Gideon and then there were some wise people in there that said, hey, if he tore down Baal's altar, Baal will deal with him. They're like, okay, cool. So then God says, hey, I want you to go, and I want you to give a war cry out, and I want you to gather an army so that you can defeat the Midianites. So now Gideon, he sees a little bit of victory because, the town people didn't kill him. And so he says, okay, so now he goes out, and it says that the Spirit of God came on him, and he goes out, and he says, I'll do that. I'll do it. He's like, but first, God, me not dying from all these people for tearing down the altar of Baal, I'm going to test you. okay? And I love this part because he says, don't get mad at me, but I just want to make sure this is you. I want to make sure that like this season that I'm going through and that you're going to get me out of it. So he says, I'm going to put a piece of fleece down, and then when I wake up in the morning, if the fleece is wet and the ground around it isn't wet, then I'll know it's you and I'll go out and I'll get this army for you. God says, okay, sure. He plays along. So wakes up, fleece is wet, ground is dry. He says, okay, cool, this is great. It must be from God. But God, hey, let me test you. Can I test you one more time? God says, sure, no problem. Knowing that God knows what comes around goes around, right? So he says, okay, well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the fleece down on the ground. And I want the what did I just say, the other way around? The fleece was, okay, I want the fleece to be dry, and I want everything else to be wet. God says, okay. So he does it. He wakes up the next morning. Fleece is wet. Everything's dry. So it's like, okay, great. So he goes and he creates this massive army. He calls out. And in his own strength, he is getting ready. And think about how motivated Gideon had to be. First he had the fleece trick. Then he saw the altar. Then he was victorious getting the armies together. And so then they go march out. And remember, Gideon's just like, he's puffed. Like, I'm doing this. I'm doing it. He's puffed. And then they're marching, and God says, hey, you know what, Gideon? You got a little too many people. And he says, what do you mean I got too many people? He says, well, you got a little too many people. Do you remember how many he sent home? Was it 12 or 24? 22,000? He said, I think you need to send 22,000 of them home. And Gideon, I'm sure, it doesn't say it in the Bible, but Gideon's like, what are you talking about? And I'm pretty sure God said, hey, remember the fleece? Remember you wanted to test me? It's time for me to test you, Gideon. And so Gideon's like, okay, let's see how this goes. He sends them home. And then they start to march. And sure enough, God says, hey, you know what? I think you still got too many. And then by the time Gideon picks his chin up off the ground, and he says, God, what are you talking about? He says, remember the second time you tested me? Right? The second time you tested me? He said, I need you to send more of them home. Go next to them. And then, you know the story, the people who put their faces in the water, they all got sent home. Only the people that were alert, right? Only people that were watching for the enemy got to stay. So now it's Gideon and 300 men. So now, in Gideon's strength, he built this huge army, and God said, you know what? It's not going to be what you expect. And he had to trust. He had to trust in not only what God was doing in him, but he also had to trust in the man that he also became. You see, he went through a process. This was a guy hiding in a wine press, and he became like the general of the Israeli army over a matter of weeks, leading people to go against outnumbered odds. And then he got tested. Do you think that he wasn't feeling like completely just destroyed at that point with 300 people, and that he had to gird himself up? And when we find ourselves in storms and we find ourselves in situations, we have to sometimes say, God, I'm going to go in the little bit of strength that I have. I'm going to go in my own strength, because remember, he said, Gideon, go in your own strength and start to do this. But then when he built the altar, and then when he went and built the other altar, and then when he went and got the people, and then when he sent the people home, Gideon's strength in himself and his faith in the Lord began to rise up and rise up and rise up. And then all of a sudden, Gideon realized, hey, with the strength that I have and God behind me and these 300 men can get the job done. And so my first point, if you're going through an issue, is that God will use the strength that you have, even if it's just a tiny little bit. God says that he could take the faith of a mustard seed and move a mountain. He can take the little bit of strength, the little bit of skill, the little bit of purpose that you have, and he can make it in where you can go and create this army of people around you where you and God can destroy anything, get through any storm. But you gotta be willing to take what little strength that you have, what little faith that you have. And sometimes, hey, if you want to test God, just be careful, because you saw what he did to Gideon, right? But so go on, Gideon's victorious. It's all good. You can read it in Judges. So God will take the strength that you have. Next guy I want to talk about is Jacob. All right? I don't have time to read the whole story of Jacob, obviously, but in Judges chapter 6, Genesis 32. Now, if you know the backstory of Jacob, Jacob deceives his dad, he deceives his brother, he steals his brother's birthright, he runs away, and now he's coming back to Israel. He's blessed, he has all this money, he has all these cattle, and so now he's on his way back to his hometown because God told him to go. And this is where we find out, this is Jacob telling his men, he instructed them, this is what you are to say to my lord Esau, which is his brother who he stole everything from. He said, your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I'm sending this message to my Lord that I might find favor in your eyes. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. So Jacob steals Esau's birthright. He leaves. He becomes fruitful. His money, cattle, family, wives, children. He has everything. God says, hey, I need you to go back. Jacob, when God told him, hey, I need you to go back, he knew Esau was there. And so that's why he sent his people and said, hey, go meet Esau. And then his people come back and say, hey, Esau's coming, but he's got 400 men with him. And it says that Jacob was struck down with fear. I want you to imagine, right? Have you ever been known you were going to get into a fight? Maybe if I go to school and gym today in gym it's on, right? And you know you're about to get into a fight and it's kind of tough, it's hard. You might be a little nervous, a little scared, right? This is what he's going through. But he knows that he was wrong for what he did. And so he's trying to make penance. He's like, hey, here, we're going to send this, we're going to do this. Hopefully, God, please, I know you sent me here. God, I know you told me to come back, but why is Esau coming with 400 men? Why? What is going on? And so imagine the fear of leaving and doing all the things that you did. Of course, yeah, he's like the modern day, hey, I'm going to, do some insider trading to get ahead. And all of a sudden it's all that's what it was, right? I did some insider stuff. I got all this money, but now I really love my family and they're coming and I'm going to lose everything. Everybody's going to die. And it's all my fault. And then all of a sudden, think about the weight on his shoulders. My wife's going to die. My kids are going to die. My sheep are going to die. My servants are going to die. Everybody's going to die. We're going to die here because God told me to come back. That's what Jacob was going through. And so, we'll go to the next verse. We're going to skip ahead because he sent a bunch of stuff. He just sent all kind of stuff to Esau. He sent a group with cattle, and then he sent more. And he sent a second group of cattle. Then he sent a third. He was trying to buy, right? He was trying to buy his way back into good graces with Esau. And so that night, this is the last night, right? He says, that night Jacob got up and took his two wives. He kept everything that was precious to him really, really close to the very end. He sent everything else ahead. Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. And he kept everything that was precious to him close. Everything that everything else could have been sacrificed if he could just keep this little bit. He'd have been satisfied. So he sends his two female servants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So then Jacob was alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. So he sends everything that he cares about, right? And now he's alone. I want you to think about that. Like when he betrays Esau, right? Steals the birthright and he runs away. He started his journey what? He started his journey alone. Like he left. It's like he was alone. He gets all of this stuff. And then he sends it all over the river. And now he's yet finds himself alone again. Not knowing what's going to happen to his family, not knowing what's going to happen to him, not knowing what's going to happen to anybody. He's in a storm. And then he sees God, he sees an angel, and it says that the angel wrestled with him all night. Can you go to the next verse? It says, and then when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that the hip was wrenched as he wrestled the man. Go to the next one. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. I want you to think about this. He has nothing. He has nothing. Everything is gone. Everything is on the other side of the river. He has no idea what's going to happen. He has nothing. He expects the worst. And then an angel of the Lord comes and wrestles and fights. You think it can get any worse than all of a sudden you have to wrestle an angel? I'm not sure if it was a fist fight. I'm not sure if it was Krav Maga. I don't know what was going on. But it said that they wrestled all night and that Jacob had to wrestle all night. And he said he would not let go of the angel. He would not let go of him because he knew that, hey, you know what? I messed up. This is the hardest. That was probably the hardest thing he ever had to do was hold on to that angel and said, I'm not letting you go. I'm not letting you go until I get the reward of the fight, until I get the reward of the heartache, until I get the reward of wrestling you and fighting with you and holding on to you. It was painful. And then still the angel hit his hip and yanked it out of socket and wrenched his hip. And so now he thought he was in pain before, but yet he's in more pain and he won't let go. He won't let go. He says, no, I am not going to let go until you bless me. I am not going to let you go. I don't care if it's daybreak. I don't care what time it is. I don't care what it feels like. I don't care how much it hurts. I don't care. I am not going to live and regret the rest of my life saying I let go because of the pain that I was suffering. I let go because it was too hard. I'm going to hold on until you bless me. And then the angel says, I'll bless you, right? Go to the next verse. He says, then the man asked him, what's your name? Jacob, he'd answered, right? And then the best thing that could have ever happened to Jacob, it said, the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and overcome. And it was Israel. It was Israel that's descendants outnumbered the stars in the sky. It wasn't Jacob's, it was Israel's, right? It was, he received the promise. It was, he had to struggle with God and with men. He had to struggle with God and with men to be blessed so that his name could change and so that he could become the person that God wanted him to be. And that's the second thing. When you're going through struggles and when you're going through issues and your marriage is terrible and your finances are terrible and there's hardships and there's pain and there's this, hold on until God gives you an identity shift and changes who you are and how you look at yourself, right? Stop being the victim and all of a sudden let God make you the victor in those situations, right? Quit being like Jacob. All of a sudden when he said, you know what, I'm not the victim. I'm going to hold on until you bless me. And when God made him Israel, he became the victor. And the story goes on. He went and he met Esau and everything was perfect and everything was fine. And then fast forward, right? You know, everything is great. But he had to have an identity shift. Some of you need to quit thinking so bad about yourselves. Some of you need to say, you know, you're your worst critics. You sit there and think that everything is against you when you're the only person against you, right? It's a lie from the enemy. You got to grab on and say, you know what? No. God, I need an identity shift. Because you're going to stay in that storm forever. And then maybe you die in the storm, never being really who God called you to be. Hold on and say, you know what? I got to go through pain. I have to go through hardships. But you know what? If I have to go through it, then me and God are coming out victorious on the other side. I'm not going to come out a wimp. I'm not going to come out defeated. I'm not going to come out hurt. I'm going to come out better. And then watch the season that God brings you in afterwards. Sometimes we are so focused on the season that we're in, and we say, oh man, I'm going through it, I'm stuck here. And maybe our language has to change a little bit and say, God, I cannot wait to see what you do with me and my new identity outside of this season, whenever it ends, outside of this, whenever I'm victorious, and how we're gonna do things for the kingdom outside of this season. We get so stuck in our own season. So change your identity. The last guy I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite, and it's Peter. Matthew 16. Now, there's tons of verses we could have picked. I just picked one. But Peter, Matthew 16, 21 through 23. From the time on Jesus began to explain to his disciples, this is toward the end, he says, I must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. So Jesus is laying it all out. And he said, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. He said, never, Lord. He said, this shall never happen to you. And Jesus turned and said to Peter, like, don't you wish, I bet you Peter's probably in heaven right now and be like, man, I wish I had an eraser to just erase those red letters right out of the Bible, right? Like, God, can we just, Jesus says to Peter, he says, get behind me, Satan. So this is the guy, let me just remind you, this is the guy that did walk on the water, right? This is the guy that was casting out demons. This is the guy, this is him. He says, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block. He says, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And so I like to put myself in Peter's shoes for a second. Like, I'd be like, I'm done. Okay. Peace. Nice knowing you, God. Like, okay, the last 3 years I've done everything. I've done everything so that I could be more like you. And I'm the one who said that you're the Christ. And I'm the one that said that you said that you were going to build your church on me and this and this. And now I'm a stumbling block to Christ. Like, I don't know. I can't imagine what Peter felt. Like, I feel like at me, I'd have failed. I'd have said, okay, I'm out. Sorry. I don't want to get in your way. I'm out. I mean, think about what Peter felt. It's like it would be worse than that, but it's like your dad saying, hey, you're a disappointment, or like the person you love the most completely ripping your heart out and completely saying, that's it. And I'm sure that Jesus didn't want to rip Peter's heart out. He loved Peter. But Jesus knew that, hey, you know what? Peter is going to grow my church. Peter's going to be the rock. Peter's going to be the rock. And so I can't water down the truth for Peter. I can't tell Peter, hey, it's okay, you messed up. I got to be, Peter, you need to know that this is about eternity, not about life and death, Peter. I'd love to tell you, it's okay, Peter, you made a mistake. But he had so much purpose for Peter and so much passion to see he couldn't wait to see what Peter was going to do when he went to the cross. Like, he knew that Peter was going to fail him again 3 days and, deny him 3 days. He knew all those things. But it was a growth process every single time that Peter messed up. Every single time Peter got up again and said, God, I'm just going to follow you. I'm just going to do it because I know you're the Christ. I know you're the Christ. And you see Peter make the mistake of losing faith when he's walking on water. You see him when he gets rebuked. You see him when he denies Christ 3 times, right? And do you imagine that the storms over the 3 years that Peter had to go through? And the people that Peter was around, he's around the 12. Like, how small did he feel? I mean, you think like John and Bartholomew, like, he's supposed to be the rock. He just got rebuked. I'm not with him, right? But then it says 6 days later that Peter was one of the 3 that got to go see the transfiguration when it came down, Peter was there 6 days later. I don't think Peter let that get him down. It was a storm. Peter had to go through the storm. Peter had to fight, and he had to get up every single time. He had to, and he denies Christ, and he gets to see Christ. The last thing that Christ saw Peter do was deny him. And then he gets to see Christ on the cross. And now Peter, even though he knows what God had said, even though he knows that he's supposed to rise in 3 days, even though that he knows, he thinks it's over. He thinks it's over. But then it says in the scripture when Mary and they go and they see the empty tomb, it says that they say, oh, the tomb is empty. And it says that Peter jumped from his seat and that he ran, and he said he outran all the women. He outran every single person. He was the first person at the tomb to see the empty tomb because he had hope that there was still a chance for him. He had hope, and he knew. He said, God, even though I'm going through this storm, even though I'm dealing with rejection and I'm dealing with the fact that I denied you and I'm dealing with the fact that I failed you, that if there's any hope that I'm going to run after that hope. And he ran after that hope. He was the first one there. And then he goes on to do all these miracles. The storms are going to come. The storms are going to come. Now, it depends on whether we just go through the storm or whether we grow through the storm, right? The storms are going to come. We have a choice. Either way, we're going through it. It's whether or not you grow through it is really what makes you come out on the other side. How you come out on the other side. Are you going to grow through your storm? We get to choose. We get to choose. And I think that Peter gets to see the reward of all of that suffering. He got to see the reward of all those hardships, that he failed Christ, that he was rebuked by Christ, that he sunk in the water, and that he did this and he did that. He all those failures and all those mistakes, but in the end, he gets to see the reward. And I think about Judas, right? I think about Judas. Peter denied Christ. Peter was rebuked. Peter went through all of this stuff. And then Judas betrays Jesus for 50 silver pieces. And Peter said, and then Judas says, he goes back and he throws the silver back at the Pharisees, and he says, I don't want this silver anymore. Oh, nope, you done. But at that point, Judas had a decision. Judas was going through a storm. Judas could decide, hey, you know what? Do I want to be victorious after this storm? Do I want to see and live the purpose that I have and do everything? Jesus loved Judas. Jesus wanted the best for Judas, but it came down to a choice. Peter decided to go after the reward of the storm. And Judas just lived in the regret. It says, and once Judas left the temple, he tried to give the money back, that the guilt and the pain, he lived in it. And then he said, there's no way for me to get out of it. I'm going to have to live the rest of this life in this storm. He couldn't see past. He couldn't see past it. Here's Peter's just hoping for a second chance. He's hoping for a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh. God, let me get a chance. Let me get my reward. Let me go after you. Let me prove myself faithful. But Judas, he couldn't see his way out. He couldn't see his way out. It wasn't that, and then he went and he bought a piece of land with the silver. He threw a rope over a tree and he hung himself. Right? The devil didn't buy the land for Judas. He didn't manifest and say, hey, here's the land. The 12 disciples didn't punish Judas. They didn't go out there and throw the rope over the tree. They didn't put the noose around his neck. They didn't do any of that. Judas said, you know what? I'm stuck. I'm stuck. And he decided to stay in his storm. And he's the one. He made that choice. And we all have that choice. We all have that choice. We could be the one, like Peter, that runs and says, oh, there's hope. There's a reward after the storm. There's a reward after the storm. Or we could decide to stay and live and say, you know what? I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to live the rest of my life in this storm because I don't see any hope. Whatever the reason may be. Maybe you don't see a choice. Maybe you don't see hope. But I'm here to tell you this morning that every single storm that I've ever been in my life, that Jesus was on the other side of it. And it was my decision to see it. And like you could say, oh, well, everything's fine with you. I know for a fact every single person, even Pastor Chris and Jason, every single person here has been blindsided by life. Blindsided by something. And you say, man, how am I going to get through this? And we don't see the end. But we have to find what little strength that we have. We say, God, and we could be doing great. And then bam. But you know what? Every single storm that I go through, I get a little bit stronger. I find a little bit more strength. And when I come out of the storm, guess what? I'm changed a little bit more. You say, oh man, look, you're different or you're this. And I want God, make me a little bit more like you. Change my identity a little bit more. Make a little bit less of Jarret in the storm and a little bit more of you when I can come out of this and I can have a different identity of who I am. Right? And then in the end, I can say, God, just let me grow. Let me be a benefit. Let me be a witness. Let me be a testimony after this storm. I don't want to be the person that somebody looks back and says, you see, Jarret, he could have had it all, but he decided to stay in the storm. Or I could be the person that says, you see, he went through that storm and he came out victorious on the other side. The storm doesn't go away. The season doesn't go. It doesn't say that, oh, if Jarret would have done something a little different, he could have, missed that. No. It's either Jarret was victorious in the storm or he wasn't. The storm's going to be here. But I'm telling you this morning that God is with you and that God can change the complete trajectory of your life and the complete trajectory of your purpose. Changing entirely who you are. I'm a different man than when I was when I got saved. I'm a different person completely. Because I've gone through the process of being changed a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit more. Getting the wisdom of the storm, getting the wisdom of the hurt, getting the wisdom of the pain, and getting the rewards of all that suffering that I went through. When you get the reward, it's worth it. Paul says at the end, he says that we're all living we're all in a race. And at the end of the race, we're going to get a heavenly crown. And then we're going to be able to take that crown and we're going to be able to put it at the feet of Jesus and say, God, I was successful and I was victorious because of what you did on the cross for me. Here's my reward. And I'm just giving it back to you because you're the reason I made it. You're the reason I made it. And so I really don't know how to end. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask, everybody to bow their heads and shut their eyes. And if you're in this place this morning, and maybe you don't know who God is.